On board this ship, there was no beds. A lot of these chaps were still laying on stretchers. A lot of them were lying on the floor. And the stench of death was dreadful. Once they got in your nostrils, that's never left me. I was in church on a Sunday morning when war broke out, although it was 20 years almost, 20 years since the end of World War One. In the village, there's 42 men had lost their lives, and it left its scars. And quite a lot of ladies in church at the time broke down crying. Of course, my father's in World War One, and his younger brother, my uncle, was reported missing and killed. He was only 17 at the time. He'd put his, like a lot of men had, advanced his age in order to get into the army. My colleague and I, who worked together, his father was in the First World War. We associated with the army with trenches and all the other ghastly business. So my colleague and I had already decided between us, if war did break out, we were going to avoid the army at all costs, which we did. And the next morning, he and I, instead of going to work, we went to the recruiting centre, and by 9:30 in the morning, we had passed our medical, and we were in the RAF. To be honest, there was more of a buzz of excitement rather than fear. And, we were set for an adventure, we felt. And that was our ambition, was to fly. I was recently asked, when you were a boy and the war broke out, how many people in the village had cars? And I said, yes, I can name them. There were 6 people only that had a car. You went anywhere, you went on a cycle or you went on a bus. And he was furious that I joined up and said that I should have waited. I suppose the First World War memories were still with him, but I didn't want to offend him by saying, of course, I did that to avoid the army. That wouldn't have been the thing to have done. There were no training facilities, and we were training with broomsticks because I had no rifles. Not that I had any desire to use a rifle by any means. And after we'd been there about 6 weeks, they said, well, we don't know what to do with you chaps because we've got no training facilities. We're sending you home. This medical officer, I stand 6'1.5", and he was taller than me and a brute of a man. He slapped me in the middle of the back and he said, "You're no good." Well, so that's just how he did. I said, "What do you mean, sir?" He said, "You're colourblind." Well, when I said to him, "Will that make a difference, sir?" And he Tried to use some bad language. He said, "Because I will you BF," he said, "we don't want you landing on the sea rather than on an airstrip." And I felt about that big. So I regretted asking him that because it was obvious. In the main, you were doing silly things like if a chappie's tunic button was undone, for comfort, you had to challenge him to, do your button up, boy, And it seemed quite foreign to me to be talking to somebody who's my senior, and I did not like it at all. Well, I stuck it for for a few months, and one Saturday night I was on duty in the guard room with the sergeants. We had a phone call through saying that there was some trouble in the pub down the village. And so I remember he went before me, and when he opened the door, somebody behind the door cracked him over the head with a bottle. That was a frightening experience, and I thought to myself, oh dear, I don't like this. I didn't join the police to get that kind of treatment. There was 1,370 something troops, and at that time there weren't many of us that could swim, which was a pretty frightening thought. I mean, I don't think we just stood much chance anyway, but much more comforting if you thought if you were torpedoed, that you could swim. We didn't have beds, of course, we had hammocks, and that was quite a laughable exercise, us clambering into these hammocks at night. And these hammocks were so close that we were touching one another, and in the tropical heat, it was awful. You had to turn your hand to anything, and I got attached to 23 MRS, which is 23 Medical Receiving Station, and I'm a squirmish individual. I couldn't stand the sight of blood, but you forgot all about that and when the occasion arose. And because we were in a country where it's full of tropical diseases, and I mean, people were dying like flies. On board this ship, there was no beds. A lot of these chaps were still laying on stretchers. A lot of them were lying on the floor. And the stench of death was dreadful. Once they got in your nostrils, that's never left me. Myself and my best mate, we both had malaria, and so we finished up in the same hospital. And he was in a dreadful state, and I was so concerned. I was feeling pretty lousy myself, but I remember trying to get across to this nurse that my colleague was dying. I felt sure he was. I was seeing so much of it in Burma and on the boat across back to Madras. The poor chap died, and I was absolutely devastated, because you live with one another and you support one another, and that's all there is. That's all you have to assist one another, and you really, being a pal or a colleague meant an awful lot. And I lost my best friend. When war finishes and you have to get on with civilian life, you forget about all these things. And my family, or my son, he's never heard these stories I'm telling you, because they seemed like a ghastly dream in many respects.